board members and stuff, if you wanted a more thorough overview of the process we've gone through for the R project. And so that's what we're here for today, is to kind of go through in a little more detail where we started and where we're at in the process in between. I have with me project manager from NPPD, Craig Holtby, which you know, Al Byron, land management manager, and Randy Sampson, who's project manager for Power Engineers. The team has been amazing, as they usually are, in terms of the work they do in this process. And these gentlemen are here to not only represent the team, but help out if you got any detailed questions that I can't answer. I also have some other team members running around the room. So we'll call on them if we need to. One of the lenders, Mr. Larry Lenders, sitting around here, and he works on the environmental part of the team.
I have a dumb question. Where did the R name come from?
The R name came from us engineers looking at what the proposed route might look like as it was envisioned through the process, and it looked kind of like a lowercase r. That was where it started. But then when we really started to think about the need for the project, it was really about reliability, reducing congestion, and enabling renewable resources. So that's really what the R means today. Okay, so we do this public involvement process that we've done for many years on many projects, and it really focuses around four key areas. Making sure that as we work with the public, we define the need and state the problem. Okay, we focus a lot of time on the need, and you'll see that. Explain what our role is and why it makes sense for NPPD to be in this role doing this project, whether it's the R project or any other big public project. Explain our approach, our process that we're going to go through in working with the public to determine a route that is most suitable and minimizes impact. And then finally, and most importantly, we listen a lot. We try and treat people fairly and professionally. We try and show them that we care, because in a lot of cases, what we're doing in terms of building a transmission line, it impacts people. And some people are going to be impacted, and we need to understand that and do the best we can to help them manage their way through this process as well. Requires a lot of input from the public. We've spent a lot of time working with the public, and requires a lot of transparency. So go back in the time a little bit. This project started actually officially when the Southwest Power Pool approved their ITP 10, their 10-year integrated transmission plan in January 2012. We actually, as the transmission owner and one of the transmission planners in the state of Nebraska, were working on concepts because we knew the issues from a reliability, congestion relief, and potential renewable development standpoint years previous to that. And it goes through this planning process, gets churned, does a lot of engineering out the other end, kind of the official, yeah, this project makes sense, the need justifies the cost. That started with that integration track, ITP 10. That's when that was approved. Out of that, the Southwest Power Pool sends us, as the transmission owner, a notice to construct with conditions, NTCC, and that states this project has a need that we documented and we believe good. We understand a high level of the cost, and the benefits outweigh the cost, and this is a project we want you to construct in your area. We take that and we can accept it, right? We accept it, and part of that is we go through the process and determine what the costs are. And you authorized us to go through that first step of developing the cost estimate in response to the NTCC in May of 2012. From what we provided back, they issued a full notification to construct. It said keep going through the process. That came in March of 2013. In March of 2013, you also authorized us to continue through the process, start the public involvement process, go through all the pieces we need to go through to get the project decided, designed, and ultimately constructed. Okay, in April of 2014, the Southwest Power Pool approved what's called the High Priority Incremental Load Study, HPILS. Okay? That study was completed by the Southwest Power Pool because they, working with the different utilities and the transmission planners and the different utilities in their footprint, determined that there was some incremental load growth that was happening that hadn't been considered in previous integrated transmission plan studies, some significant incremental load growth. Specifically, there was a lot of the focus of this study was load growth in the New Mexico footprint area having to do with oil and natural gas development. The load growth that we saw in Nebraska in the summer of 2012, where we realized the load, the irrigation load, and we had our Zone 5 issues, that was incorporated into this study. That information of that load growth wasn't available when we were doing the studies that ultimately resulted in the 2010 IPP. So that was added to this study. Out of that study process came another project that says there's a reliability need to add a transformer into the NPPD system that would interconnect the R project with the underlying 115 kV system, and that's the Fedford transformer that's now part of this bigger project. So that was approved as part of the high priority incremental load study by Southwest Power Pool in April of 2014. We got the notification to construct in May of 2014, and so we incorporated that into our overall project. And as part of our overall need now is we have to do an interconnection up there in Fedford, right, in order to meet those requirements. We received, the PRB approved these projects in October of 2014, and we received the PRB order in December of 2014. So, again, briefly, this is kind of the map of the stuff that was studied and approved by the Southwest Power Pool as part of the 2012 Integrated Transmission Plan. I'm going to focus primarily on Nebraska, but you'll see there are also projects in the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma and Kansas. But in Nebraska, there were two big projects that were approved as part of that, the R project. All right, this is where an engineer looks at that and says that's an R, everyone else says no, it's not, but that's the R. And then the Hoskins-Neely project. Both of those projects came out of that study process.
Tom,
Yes.
what percent of the cost is going to be under the NPPD?
Okay, so these projects are both $345,000, both projects. So for projects that go through the Southwest Power Pool process, they have what they call a highway byway funding methodology. So projects that are greater than 300K, which 300,000, excuse me, projects that are greater than 300,000 volts. So these 345 kV projects would fit in that category. Their cost gets shared across the whole footprint. So we're responsible for building it, financing it, doing all those things, and then we put those costs into our revenue requirements. When that all washes out, ultimately about 7% of those costs are paid for by NPPD because we're about 7% of the entire footprint load, and the rest of those costs are shared across the footprint. But we're also, under that same methodology, paying our 7% share of these projects that are greater than 300 kilovolts going on in Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle, et cetera.
I didn't know what our percentage was.
And that's about what it is when it all washes out in the end. It's based on our load share of the entire footprint. Okay, so I'm going to use this transmission map to just to dive a little bit deeper again into the need. We talked about one of the R's for the need was enabling the future development of renewables. And there's a map coming up a little later that shows the NREL wind data, but the NREL wind data shows that this part of the state, and actually all across this part of the state, there's a lot of good wind potential in terms of wind resources. There's today no big extra high voltage 345 kV kind of transmission in that part of the state. In order to develop renewable resources in the future in that part of the state, if that's what happens, you need transmission. And so part of the benefit and need for this project is to have transmission access to enable future development. So Zone 5, that's this area. We all know about the summer of 2012 and how hot and dry it was and the kind of load issues that we saw. I'm going to review those again briefly. It was a night in July it was the night before a wholesale customer meeting, that our loads got high enough at 12 a.m., 1 a.m. time frame, because we were bringing all of the load back off of load control. So all the irrigation wells were starting, and we had a big upsurge. And what we saw on our system is that the loads got high enough that we would potentially run the risk of a cascading failure of the system in a contingency event. We were able to serve all the load on a real-time basis, but if any one element of this ring, this 115 kV ring were to fail, and there was a couple of elements that were particularly limiting at that time. It's off the screen, but it was the North Norfolk to Battle Creek element was one of the particularly limiting elements. If that element were to fail, we ran the risk of overloading the system and causing a cascading outage. We're required by reliability standards to manage the system so that we can reliably deliver electricity when everything's intact and when any one element's out of service. So this N-1 type of contingency. We do this on a nearly real-time basis in Donna. They got computers that watch the loads, do the modeling, do the security analysis. What we saw that night is the load was getting high enough that if we had a failure in the system, we could have a cascading outage. And our response to that has to be get the system back in a stable state, and we had to shed load. We shut off substations in north central Nebraska over a period of about an hour. We floated across 2 or 3 different substations. Within that time, we also contacted our customers. We're able to get things back under control. But that's the magnitude of the event that we were in that night. And it was driven because we don't have enough transmission to reliably serve load under all conditions in that part of the state. So from a reliability standpoint, that's one of the big needs. The project from Neely to Hoskins is really important to fixing that need. The R project is really important to fixing that need because that gives us an interconnection in Thedford that provides a better resource, a better source to that 115 kV system that serves all the load in that part of the state. The project from Neely to Hoskins does the same. It provides an interconnection with the Neely side. Reliability. Got a map coming up in a little bit. I'll talk a little bit more about reliability as it has to do with storm and storm impacts. We also, from a reliability standpoint, this interface on the system is referred to as the Gerald Jones Station Stability Interface. It's a interface that requires us to manage because of the system and its robustness. In certain conditions today, without this extra transmission, if we were to see one of these big line segments that go to the east from Gerald Jones Station trip off, go out of service, be impacted by a storm, we have special protection schemes within the Gerald Jones Station protection system that will cause one of the plants to trip and one of the plants to reject load. And the reason we have to do that is to ensure that when you lose this load from some fault in the system, we can keep the entire system stable as everything rebalances. Adding this line will help us with that stability interface. It gives us another path, makes the overall network stronger, helps improve the reliability of the system, and makes this stability interface and all the special protection schemes a lot less important from a reliability standpoint. Reducing congestion is simply like the interstate highway. That's the way I like to think of it. The bigger lines you have, the bigger highway you have, the more energy you can move back and forth. Most of our big lines, again, are in the southern part of this area, basically North Platte, Kearney, Grand Island, Lincoln kind of corridor. Have another big line going east to west across the state, allows for more energy flow, reduces congestion on the system, allows us to use our generation resources more effectively. So that's reduced congestion, reliability, renewable resource development. Yes?
Will that take care of those temporary turbines you bring in?
Once these are in service, yes. We have one more summer, this summer, where these the new our project, or excuse me, the new Neely Hospital line won't be in service until the spring of 2016. So this summer, we still will be evaluating whether we need to bring in generation into this north central part of the state. And we'll do that this spring. We look at what's going on from a ground moisture standpoint, what the forecast is. We work with the state climatologist and get some good information. So we have one more summer where we may have to bring in generation into this area. Don't know yet. Given today and where we are from a weather standpoint and a soil moisture standpoint, we might be in pretty good shape this summer, not needed. But we're going to go through the process and evaluate. All right. So I hit on the needs: reliability, congestion, renewable. And when we go through this process of public involvement, this is the part that to me is as important as anything, is really about getting an understanding of why this is important. And when we went through the public hearings, I did see a shift in the people that were attending the public hearings, and we saw some people a lot in the public hearings. At the early public hearings, I heard a lot of, we don't believe you need it. At the late public hearings, well, we can kind of understand why you might need it, but we still have a bunch of other concerns. That's good. I mean, I get that and I understand that. But we were making a movement on the need part. Okay, so routing and siting. We have guiding principles that we try and use. And again, it's really a balancing act. We have to balance a lot of things in order to do this because there's a lot of competing interests. And you can't necessarily just stack it up and always say this is more important than that. You've got to look at how you balance and find the best combination of all these issues. So we got to make sure we meet the project need and benefit. We generally use section and half section lines in agricultural areas because that's what the statutes allow us to condemn on if we need to go through eminent domain and condemnation proceedings. We try and use existing access as much as we can. Generally, the shorter the line route, the less impact it has. So you got less landowners, you got less line in the air, generally less impact. The fewer the large angles, generally that means less impact. So if you could have a shorter, straighter line in general, that would hopefully have less impact than a longer line that has lots of corners in it. Those angles cost money, they take more space, they impact ag operations, those kinds of things. We have to, as we go through the phases of the process, make sure we provide a reasonable amount of flexibility. In other words, we don't want to, too early in the process, narrow our choices down to the point that we can't get to an answer that minimizes impact. Have to be able to measure and compare the criteria. We continue to add to the data and refine the data as we go along, so we don't start over, we build, and as we build, we go back and look at stuff that we looked at all the way through. And again, the public input is really essential to this process. So from an open house standpoint, there's a summary of all the open houses. You can see the first round of open houses started in early 1990 or early 2013. If you look at that, we sent over 6,200 invitations out to those open houses. Now a large number of these people were invited multiple times. And we had 1,788 guests. Again, from a person basis, the same person might have been a guest at all of those. Okay, but we have a, I think, pretty good process in terms of getting people there and having a good dialogue. We started with the study area development. The study area is a little over 7,000 square miles in area. It stretches roughly 90 miles from Gerald Gentleman Station up to this southern Charter County area, and about 155 miles west to east. The width of the study area is 42 miles, and then down around Gerald Gentleman Station is 21 miles, and then on the east-west section is 30 miles. And again, we tried to start with a study area that would be true to the process, which is meet the needs, and build a route that hopefully was as short versus longer, less angles versus more angles. So it kind of gives you, okay, there's the shape. We had to get up in this area, so we go north and go east. And then give us enough flexibility so that we can find suitable routes as we go through the process and narrow down and learn more. At the first round of open houses, and we did this at all the open houses, we did an informal survey as people exited to try and get a good understanding of what their big concerns were. Top 3 concerns: proximity to residences, minimize the impact of farm and ranch operations, and restoration. That's about 77%, so if you do the 80-20 rule, those top 3 are the biggies. Okay, so this is the Sandhills region, and it's got a transmission system overlaid on it. The 345 kV system is in green, 230 kV is in blue, and the 115 kV, which is hard to see in some cases, is the dashed lines for the entire state. I can't emphasize enough that in order to meet the needs of this project, we have to be in the Sandhills. That's where the project is. So we heard feedback of just avoiding the Sandhills. Well, we can't, and we can't do that and accomplish the needs of the project. So today, NPPD, and I didn't get all the lines, but I got the major lines. I looked at, we operate a 115 kV system, North Platte, Maxwell, Thedford, Ainsworth, Valentine, Cody, and East to O'Neill. We have today over 236 miles ourselves of 115 kV transmission line in the Sandhills. That's been in the Sandhills from between 1955, the oldest segment, and 1979, the newest segment. So we've got 60 years of experience of operating high voltage transmission in this region, in that particular region. If you look at our total, sum total of our business and our experience, we've been, us and our predecessors have been doing this with 5,000 miles of transmission in the state for 70, 80 years. Here's the wind map. And again, this is NREL data. And as you go back and look at the needs of the project and start to talk about some of the big issues at a macro level, these maps can be instructive in terms of, okay, this is the good wind area, and while where the final route maybe isn't clear up in the best portion of the wind area, it's getting us close, and it's getting us in the neighborhood that makes it more likely that should someone want to develop wind or other renewables in the future, they can, because there's going to be a transmission line there. Storm damage footprint. We talked about reliability. I said I was going to talk about storm damage footprint. This footprint, as you can look at the different windstorms and ice storms that we've suffered on our system, has really been southeast of a line that kind of cuts from the McCook area up into the, that's probably the, where your ranch is maybe. Is that what, east of you?
Yeah, that's east of me.
East of you, so that's probably the Bloomfield area.
East and south.
So that's been our experience. And those same storms with the transmission lines we have in this part of the state didn't give us those kinds of major damage. Another thing, not just our experience, but the design codes, the National Electric Safety Code, and the American Society of Civil Engineers Code that tells you what you should be considering for ice loading criteria when you build structures like transmission lines. Their code actually has a break where they basically say in their code, if you're south and east of roughly this line, you should be considering in your design requirements heavier icing loads if you're north and west of this line. So it's not just our experience, it's what the codes from their experience are telling us as well. Yes?
Tom, one of the comments I received was that, well, you don't have a line up there, so of course you don't have storm experience up there. But what you're telling us is that that's not the case because we've got the 115 lines.
Yes, we actually do have lines up there. Our customers have lines up there. And not only based on the experience of us and our customers, the people that write the codes that says this is what you should consider and how you should design your facilities to meet those codes, they recognize that there's a difference in icing and ice loading south and east of that versus north and west of that. So from a reliability standpoint, putting this line out here in a different area geographically not only gives us separation, but puts us in an area where there's a lower likelihood, doesn't mean it won't happen, but a lower likelihood of the same kind of major storm causing the same kind of damage. Answer your question.
Thank you.
So here's the same map, but this time we got the highways on it. And you can get a feel for the major highways, Highway 83 running north of North Platte, Highway 7, Brewster up to Ainsworth, 281, Highway 11. The message here is the north-south access in terms of following existing highway corridors for this project is a lot easier than the east-west access. There just isn't a lot of good existing corridors going east to west. So we have to recognize that in our process and understand it when we do it. We also heard a lot of feedback during the process and during the hearings. Why not come up here to Highway 20? Well, coming up there to Highway 20 adds about 60 miles of line to go up and then come back down. So 60 miles of line, longer, more impact, more landowners. I've got some more slides to talk about this, more cost. Is that really the right thing to do to accomplish the goals of the project? That's the question. So you take that access map and you drill in further. This goes down to, okay, these are some public, some private roads that exist within the study area. And again, you're okay over here because we can get up along the highway, and you're okay over here. But this area out here, there's just not a lot of roads. And where there are roads available, we do want to take advantage of them. And that's why you'll see in our proposed route, we propose moving up Highway 7 for a while. Last month, the Ballas were here, talked to you for a while, left us with some maps, some county road maps that they stitched together to kind of make their point about access, and access is difficult. We went back, and this is information that we, again, started with very early in the project and developed as we went through. We went back to verify that we had that information, and we did, so that's good. I mean, it's good that we already knew about it and had it, so we did want to make sure that we verified that. We actually, we started with those same kind of maps, and through our process were to determine that in some of those cases, some roads on some maps might be shown as roads, but they're actually have never been improved, so they're just county road right-of-way, and there's nothing there. In other cases, there's roads that have been done that may not be on the maps, so we look at a combination of things to make sure we got the best picture of access. This is a map that's put together by several groups, including the Game and Parks Commission. It has to do with American burying beetle habitat in Nebraska. The blue outline is basically the sand hills, and this map gives you a predicted occurrence. You can't do all the fine detailed routing based on a map like this, but this can give you a good feel of, okay, what are the big issues at a macro level? And one thing to recognize, and I'm going to show you some of this for other species as well, we're not saying that there is no impact in that study area. What we're saying is that there's impact everywhere. And so from a starting point, if we pick a study area that's going to allow us to go through this process and get to a route that minimizes impact. So there's been discussion, well, why not go further north? Why not go along Highway 20? From this species, the American burying beetle, that looks like that may not be as good. So again, it's just one of those factors you kind of look at. Central Flyway. There's Nebraska, there's 4 big flyways in the United States, the Central and the Mississippi Flyway both cover part of Nebraska. We are in the middle of the Central Flyway. We cannot avoid that. All of us that do these big infrastructure projects, whether it's NPPD or any of the other utilities in Nebraska, have to deal with the fact that there are birds that move back and forth in the state. So what do we do and what can we do? Okay, we're a chartered member of the Avian Powerline Interaction Committee, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Audubon Society, and others. So we've been concerned about and aware of the interaction of power lines and birds for a long time. And so we work with them to build standards, we construct our facilities to those standards, and we stay very engaged in that process because that's really the responsible thing to do. We can't avoid migratory birds. They're part of our life, and so we have to do the best we can. Going to a specific migratory bird, whooping cranes, and this is a map of stopover landscapes in recorded sightings of whooping cranes. Again, this doesn't tell us that there's no whooping cranes here. We have to deal with that. But it gives us a good feel that in terms of dealing with this species, where's the better place to be in trying to find a line route that minimizes impact. If we go further north, it looks like there could be more impact. If we go further south, it looks like there could be more impact. So from a starting point with this study area, probably not a bad place to be. This is a map that was put together by the Game Parks Commission, having to do with sensitive wildlife habitats with wind energy development. There's our study area overlaid on it, and when we're crossing sensitive habitat, we have to deal with that. But if we go further north or further south, we're going to go into even more sensitive areas, more difficulties potentially. If we go further north, we're going to go into even more sensitive areas, more difficulties potentially. So from a starting point, where we started probably was a good place to be. So that's the study area. Next round was the project corridors. We narrowed the study area down into corridors based on information we learned from the study area portion of the process. And we had 3 north-south corridors that we tried to take advantage of existing access as much as we could, and 2 east-west corridors. The east-west corridors we pushed to the south end of the study area. Think of the maps we just looked at as an example. There's more sensitive habitat, more wetlands, more issues in the north end than the south end in general. So we're trying to keep some flexibility so we have different opportunities for line routes and trying to narrow the process to minimize impact. This outline is the area that we were looking at for a potential substation. This was actually done before we knew we had to be in Thetford, so we were still considering some other areas. And then potential substations on the Western Area Power Administration line. Okay, so again, in summary, the east-west corridors were in the southern portion of the study area because of the wetland prevalence in the northern parts, better American burying beetle habitat in the northern parts, the whooping crane, stopover areas, you saw those things, so we're trying to push further south there. Did the same thing in terms of a survey of interest, concerns, as the people left those open houses. Top 2, minimizing impact. I think there was a little flop there. And then proximity to residences, minimizing disturbance and access, continue to be up there. Access has kind of moved up a little bit. If you look at kind of that 80-20 rule, the top 4 represents 78% of the comments. This is about the time where we finished developing the 56 criteria that we're really going to analyze and collect data on and help us fine-tune and get down to a suitable route. Not going to read all of them, but they really have to do with land use criteria, a lot of it, environmental criteria, and engineering and construction criteria. So, we take all this information, keep putting it in this geographical information system. If you went to any of the open houses, you saw the stations where landowners could sit down and put their information in. From all the information gathered from the first 2 rounds of open houses, we identified and screened potential route leaks. We looked at every section line and every half-section line in the study area, in the corridors, I should say. We looked at over 2,000 miles of potential route links. We narrowed those down to about 800 miles of potential routes as we went through the process to find alternate routes. So again, a lot of analysis and a lot of work by the team. This is an overhead aerial shot of Gerald Gentleman Station, and then the Gerald Gentleman Station switchyard where we will be terminating the one end of the R project. We've had questions about, okay, can we do something different in the southern end of the route in terms of routing different directions? One of the issues here that makes this very complicated is how do we get out of the switchyard? The only existing open bay in the switchyard is here on the southeast corner. all these green lines are existing 345 kV lines that terminate in that switch yard, and all the blue lines are existing 230 kV lines that terminate in that switch yard. So to avoid a high number of line crossings or switching the entire substation around in order to rotate so you could actually go out of a different bay, this really is the best way to get out. So that kind of says if we're getting out that way and we're trying to avoid line crosses, we've got to go east. It's hard to go west. If we were to try and do this, to go west out of the substation, it's about $3 to $4 million to modify the substation. That doesn't account for any lost production costs. Because while this substation was being modified, assuming we could get outage schedules, this is a major substation on the transmission system, it may very well impact our ability to produce electricity. It doesn't assume any potential replacement power costs. It does impact our ability to produce electricity. So it's a pretty complex effort. And so from a best way to get out standpoint, going out south and east, staying on our property as much as we can is the right way to go. When we went out and talked about the alternate routes, at that point we knew we were going to be in Thedford, so now we're talking about the Thedford substation location. We had identified a preferred route in green. We identified potential interconnection points over here with the Western Area Power Administration line. We were looking at one on the southern end with an alternate route, one on the northern end with a preferred route, and other alternatives. And we also eliminated this far west north-south corridor. And the big reason that we did that is when you compare this corridor with the other two east of it and look at access and soil composition and terrain and those kinds of things, it wasn't as favorable as the other ones. It was the poorest of the three. And we have good route alternatives here. We felt confident that this one just isn't going to work for us anymore, so let's eliminate it from further consideration. And there's the summary that what I just went through. Again, we looked at the most important issues as people left the alternate route open houses. Look at my notes. Farm and ranch operations impact was the highest again. Proximity to residences was the second. Restoration again was third, and access was fourth. Those three again make up about 77% of the total. So we're getting consistent information about concerns, and as we move forward through the project, those are the things that we want to keep focused on in terms of impact residences, restoration, access, minimizing the impact of ag operations. If you combine all of the information that we got in those exit surveys from all the open houses, the top three turned out to be proximity to residences, minimizing impacts to farm and ranch operations, and restoration. And they represent about 80%, or about 78% of the total. We were, during this time frame, a couple different reroutes were proposed. There was a group of us that met out north of Sutherland with a group of landowners, Fish and Wildlife Service and others, and part of that process they proposed over a period of weeks a couple of different routes. One of them was to go further south and come along the east side of North Platte. The challenge here, this was something that we were looking at and we considered in the study here, but if you look at these proposals, and this is our best adaptation of what we thought they were trying to propose, is we've got several line crossings which impacts reliability. We would be going very close to the North Platte Regional Airport, which would be very difficult to construct around because of FAA restrictions and limits. I didn't really hit it, but if you go back to the slide, there we go. If you go back to the slide about sensitive areas, the area where the confluence of the North and South Platte happen, which is right around North Platte, is an area that's been identified as a sensitive area from a wildlife standpoint. So, from our standpoint, this alternative wasn't as good as what we were already looking at. We were also given a proposal to do something further to the west. I already talked to you about this, the complexities and issues of trying to get out of Gerald Gentleman Station if we were going to the west. If you go way to the west, and again, we're a little unclear on what was proposed because it appears that some of what was proposed was maybe go clear west of what we originally studied from a study area standpoint. But if you go to the west end, we still have challenges with roads and access. We still have the potential of crossing the Birdwood Creek area, some of the tributaries, which is an area that's been of great concern to various entities. And there's other conservation easements, wildlife management type wetland reserve program areas here that weren't identified, but they're there. And so they would cause issues as well. So again, we don't feel that this, or didn't feel that this was as good as an alternative to the alternatives we already proposed. So after that was done, there were 3 areas that we wanted to go and get additional information. Around this square here where the preferred route was angled is a private airstrip owned by a family that does agriculture spraying. And the preferred route was really going to impact our operations. So we went down and talked more with landowners in this area to look at other alternatives. In this area here, just east of Thetford, we got a lot of information from people that lived in the northern corridor with that route alternative. We didn't get near as much from the southern corridor. We were seeing issues in terms of river crossings, tree impacts, shelter belt impacts. We wanted to talk to these people in the south and learn more from them to make sure we had a good data for an informed decision. Same as you go further east here, we found some wetland reserve program area here, and we needed to, again, talk to the people that were on the southern portion of this area more because we didn't get a lot of information from them during that round of open houses to make sure we had good detailed information to make a good recommendation for a final proposed route. And that's what we came down to, and that's what we went to the public hearings with. We made adjustments here to avoid the Brocious airstrip. We made adjustments here to provide what we thought was a better route from, or what we think is a better route from minimizing the impact, avoiding shelter belts, homes, better river crossings, and then here avoiding the wetland reserve program areas. And there's the summary slide of what I just said. So at the public hearings, we did have really good participation. Had a lot of comments, a lot of feedback. You can see highlighted there. Again, I've talked about some of the comments as I've gone through this. There was a lot of concern about being out of the sandhills and the impact of the sandhills. A lot of desire to be further north, further south. A lot of these issues are issues that we'll continue to work through with the landowners as we get onto the property and work with them and work with them to find the best place to place structures and those kinds of things. I think there may be an impression that this line will, damage a 200-foot strip, which is the width of the wide right-of-way for the whole 220 miles, and that's really not the case. In the case where we have the potential of impact is really when it comes to the land and the land use is where the foundations are. So if you've got a mile strip of a 345,000 volt transmission line, I think in our example we calculated that was about 24 acres under that mile strip. The part that we really need to work on from a minimizing impact is the foundation part. And we also have impact issues when it comes to the wires and lines, and we'll have to deal with those and make sure we're doing those right in terms of how they interact with wildlife. But some people, I have the impression that this is going to, be a scourge. No. Engineering considerations. Access is very important, so we looked at the terrain, and we characterized the terrain roughly in terms of how it's grouped. It's about a third, a third, a third. A third of it, 37% of it's relatively flat, 27% of it's got rolling hills, about 36% of it's what we would call rough terrain. We use aerial photography to develop that. Okay, so that aerial photography's got about plus or minus 2 foot accuracy. We have, when we identify the final line route, detailed photographic and topographic information that'll get us down to an accuracy that's like plus or minus a half a foot, right? So we have really good detail. But most important in the next phases of the project, we need to go out there and spend time with landowners and talk to them and really hone in on where the best place is to put the structures on that property. Just as a point of reference, if any of you worked with a USGS topographic map, like if you go hiking or something like that, the accuracy of those is plus or minus 5 feet. So we're already working with information that's more accurate than what USGS generally publishes for the public. This is kind of how that breaks up in terms of sections. The rough is in red, the rolling hills are in yellow, and the flatter terrain is in green. You know, it's kind of interspersed, but there's general areas of roughness south and east of Bedford, in northeast Blaine County, northwest Loup County, a little bit in northeast Loup County, and then coming across to northern Lincoln County in terms of rough areas. Wanted to give you an idea of what some of this looks like. This is a Google Earth 3D view of the terrain along Highway 7. So there's the highway. It's hard to see, but we have, as part of our preliminary design, and this will adjust as we get out there working with the landowners, we've already started spotting, okay, where could a structure be? Well, there's one right there. And this is the right of way. How would we access this? We're already thinking about access, so we have a good starting point to talk with the landowners about when we get out. This is the same area, aerial view. There's the line, so we were kind of looking north here. And this is what we would categorize as flat. These yellows and reds have to do with percent slope, not how much in terms of distance the slope is, but what the grade is. So you could have a very steep slope over a couple feet, or a very steep slope over 100 feet, and it would be different from a terrain standpoint. So the flat territory is predominantly 0 to 5% slope with intermittent 5 to 15% slope in terms of how we categorize it. This is north of Sutherland. I think this is just north of the North Platte River Bridge. Looking north, this is an area that we would consider rolling terrain. Again, same view using Google Earth. This is plus or minus 2 feet, and you can see where the engineers have started thinking about preliminary structure spots. They're hard to see, but they're the outlines there. And then the green again is where we're thinking preliminary about access. So here's the view from overhead. There's the line. Here's kind of the bridge where we're looking north. We kind of categorize rolling as we see a lot of 5 to 15% grade with intermittent flatter areas and intermittent steeper areas. So this is an example of rough terrain, and we use this photo as a mock-up of what the line would look like. And we use this as the hearing. So we took this photo in this area, east of Thetford, and this is an actual photo where we superimpose what the transmission line structures would look like in this particular terrain, and we use that at the hearing so people can get a feel of what it's going to look like. So here's the without and here's the with. This is the Google Earth view, the three-dimensional Google Earth view, so you can kind of see the same thing. You can see the line there and what we've preliminarily laid out as potential structure spots. And again, this is the view from overhead with the slope grades. So in the rough terrain, we see a high occurrence of stuff with steep slopes that are greater than 15%. The point of all this is to give you a feel for what we have for data already. We do have good data, but I do want to emphasize that this isn't enough. I mean, we're going to have to go out and work with the landowners and take this information as a starting point as we move into the next phases of the project. So we have two structure types that we've been talking about, tubular steel poles, 120 to 170 feet. The foundations are 7 to 8 feet in diameter, typically 20 to 45 feet deep. We've got lattice towers, most likely for the other type of structure, 100 to 155 feet tall. Each of these will have a helical pier foundation that will be 3 to 4 of these piers potentially. Each one of these is 7 to 12 inches in diameter and buried, screwed 20 to 40 feet down into the soil. And what those designs look like will depend a lot on what we actually find for soil characteristics when we're out there working. We're also working with vendors to look at other alternatives. We're trying to be innovative and think outside the box, finding ways to minimize impacts from our construction. Here's kind of generally where we plan to see the structures. The blue would be the steel tubular poles, and the red, magenta would be where we plan to have the lattice towers that have the 4-foot type of foundation, the 4 feet as a foundation. And again, if you think about where we were in terms of terrain standpoint, this corresponds with the rougher terrain more. We are going to use innovative construction techniques. We will use low ground pressure equipment. We will use matting in areas where we need to minimize as best we can impact. We will use aerial construction where we can, where we don't have good access, fly-in sections, those kinds of things, again, to minimize impact. In terms of our approach to restoration, number one is avoid and minimize as best we can. We're not going to be 100% of it, right? But we have to do the best we can with our construction techniques and practices to minimize that as much as possible. Where there is damage, then we need to mitigate. We do that through stabilization, vegetation cover, and working through that process, and that could take time. We have a good expert with us. We had a lot of discussion at the hearings. One of the things that he said is most important to the success and how fast the success goes where we have to do restoration is rain, moisture, snow, those kinds of things. And we can't control Mother Nature, so we'll be dependent on that and have to continue to work through that. The picture here is the Erickson substation site, which we've heard a lot about over the years. The substation site was purchased as part of the original Keystone XL project that we were doing to support what we needed to do. We started grading work on that substation to get it ready about the time everything changed. So we had this property that we had to restore. And so this is in May of 2012, working through the process. And here it was in July of 2014. So I'm not ready to sell it yet, but I think we've made a lot of progress in 2 years in terms of revegetating and restoring that particular site. Here's an example on the Maxwell-Thetford 150 kV line. This is structure 36, which is north of Maxwell on a county road. Right? Okay. We do monitor our lines. We have thousands of structures, over 200 miles of line that exists, and we do annual patrols. And when we have issues where the landowners are concerned, we work with the landowners to fix those issues. When we have issues where we're concerned with the integrity or the safety of the line, we go in and fix those issues. This is an example where a blowout was encroaching upon a structure. Notice the blowout didn't start at the structure, it was encroaching upon the structure. So we went in and recontoured it, put some stabilization in there, and we're revegetating and fixing that. Because we were concerned about the integrity of that structure and the line as a result of that. Easement compensation, 200-foot right-of-ways. We will do, and that's already started, I believe, some base market value surveys based on land use. We are using an independent real estate appraiser as we do with all of our projects. We are using basically the same formula and methodology, which is to compensate for basically 80% of the value, the appraised value of the easement area that we occupy, as well as compensation for the structures. So a single pole structure, we would pay them an extra ½ acre worth of value, and for a lattice tower structure, the footprint's bigger, we would pay them for an extra acre worth of value. Of course, we would do any special compensation, damage payments, etc., based on the particulars of the situation, what kinds of things we'd have to do there. Yes.
Is that based on the 80% appraised value, or would those be 100%?
For the structure payments, would be on 100%.
Are those, is that income taxable?
That we get asked that question once in a while, and the best answer is if they have a question about whether it's taxable or not, they need to talk to their tax counsel or their accountant. We don't send a 1099. Do we send 1099s? Payments?
Yeah, we get W-9 signed.
W-9s? Okay, so, all right, there we go. I learned something today too. Okay. So another thing to remember, and I know, just going through the process, The easement allows us to operate, maintain, to do everything we need to do to safely take care of that transmission line. It puts some minor restrictions on their use of the property. They can't stack hay under it, they can't necessarily build buildings, those kinds of things. We ask if they want to do some structures, maybe they can do, but we need to know ahead of time, and it's really a safety issue. We need to make sure that the right-of-way is maintained safely so it doesn't cause any sort of property or human, animal damage. We also don't allow people to plant trees, and we will clear the right-of-way of vegetation. We're required for this size of transmission line, we're required to have a vegetation management program. And our vegetation management program, we operate those right-of-ways clear of tall growing vegetation. So, what's next? We've been working on the habitat conservation plan and incidental take permit. Remember, we're getting an incidental take permit for the American burying beetle. And the habitat conservation plan, which is requiring us to go through an environmental impact statement process with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We actually started this. First time we talked to the Fish and Wildlife Service was April of 2013. We plan to be done based on their schedule. They're controlling this process, but based on their schedule right now, we expect to have that resolved in December 2016. Fish and Wildlife Service did publish a notification of intent in the Federal Register in October. They went through a comment process on the scoping that closed on December 29th, and so I believe they're in the process of evaluating their comments. We will start the right of entry surveys and appraisal process this month. Engineering design is starting this month. Easement acquisition will start in September as we get through some of these earlier phases. Construction right now, we're hoping to start in January of 2017 after we receive our incidental take permit. Finish with an in-service September 2018. There's the costs in terms of the budget. About $35 million for substation work. The balance is line segments for a little over $361 million total. So there's an overview. Any questions?
So how long would that take to put that project in?
A couple years, 18 to 24 months?
21 to 24 months.
21 to 24 months of construction. Any other questions?
I just want to tell you, I appreciate it, really good information.
Thank you. Thanks.
Eric, do you have a question? Tom, I was just curious, what's the percentages of, from the flat terrain to the rough terrain, the amount of access roads that are adjacent to each one of those types? Have you done anything with that?
I don't know if we've gotten that down into the percentage where there's existing access roads in rough terrain. We can do a little work on that. Most of the access, I don't go back to that, but most of the access is really along Highway 83 and Highway 7. Most of the east-west access is going to be difficult.
I could call, I'd like to compliment the team that's put this entire thing together. I've been fortunate to be able to attend most of the open houses. It's always been handled very effectively and very well. I'd also like to compliment all of the people that come to the open houses. Everybody's always treated us, very, very cordially, and I thought the whole process went very, very well. It was quite educational for me. I've never been through something like that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
your team.
The team does a great job, and as I've told them a lot, they make my job easy standing up here because they do an outstanding work and they're easy to defend. And we wouldn't be here without the work they do. I do agree with you also at the public hearings and the comments that you guys have received. I appreciate the concerns that the landowners and other stakeholders have, and we will continue to work with them on those. And I also do appreciate professionalism that they've shown as we've gone through this process in terms of how they present their issues and concerns, and we need to listen to them.
Yeah, I want to also thank everybody for all their hard work. The first 10 or 15 miles out of Gentleman is probably the toughest. I mean, we've got a really narrow corridor, we've got a lot of properties, and we have a lot of wetland habitat, ducks, everything. And I don't know, we looked at, what, about 4 or 5 different deals up there trying to relocate around things, so it's a tough process up there when you don't have much room to move.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that would be all of the items that we have for the strategic session.
We now are open for public comments.